I am 54 years old now. Age did not bring me wisdom, it brought me distance. There is a difference. Wisdom still carries vanity. Distance brings precision. When I look back, I don't see emotional mistakes. I see positioning errors. I was functionally stable, socially accepted, technically competent, and that is often deceptive. At the time, I still believed that predictability created security and that coherence stabilized relationships. Machiavelli had already warned that power does not reward intentions, only positions, but I had not yet understood this in practice. Today, that belief sounds almost childish to me. In environments where power circulates, excessive clarity does not reassure, it informs. Any information offered without necessity eventually becomes leverage for someone else. At 54, the world no longer seems contradictory to me. It is far too consistent. People move according to simple, repetitive, almost tedious incentives. Fear of losing position, vanity disguised as ambition, the urgency to climb before someone else blocks the ladder. None of this is shocking. It is structural. The problem was never other people's behavior, but expecting something different from it. When I was younger, I still attributed these movements to character, intention, morality. Today, I see only flow, and there is a specific calm that appears when you stop demanding coherence from the world. It is not resignation, it is cognitive alignment. It was through this lens, one I did not yet have at 38, that everything began. At the time, I still believed that clarity organized relationships. That is why I agreed to meet Ethan for the first time. The contact came through a mutual lawyer, someone reliable enough not to trigger immediate suspicion. The proposal sounded simple: structure a private credit business for mid-sized companies. Ethan introduced himself as an intermediary, someone who opened doors to investors who did not appear on their own. He did not talk about partnership. He talked about function. I considered that professional. It was merely incomplete. In that first conversation, Ethan already spoke as if the deal were decided. He cited approximate figures, mentioned investors by name, and treated my participation as the final missing piece. He said something like, "With you in, this closes fast." I listened, asked technical questions, and explained how credit release would work. I thought I was reducing risk by being clear. In reality, I was doing something else entirely, making my limits visible to someone who needed exactly that in order to move ahead of me. That was where the story truly began. I was 38 when the proposal was placed on the table with clear numbers. The business was the creation of a receivables financing company for mid-sized businesses, operating with private capital. Nothing experimental, nothing conceptual, a simple model, already used in the market. I would enter with the company, the initial capital, the risk analysis team, the legal structure, and full operational control. Ethan would not enter as a managing partner. He would enter as an intermediary. His role was to attract investors and bring companies interested in operating credit. The split was presented as something already calculated: 70% of the net profit for me, 30% for him. When I questioned the percentage, the answer came ready. It's the cost of access. I make the money arrive. He did not talk about risk. He did not talk about responsibility. He did not talk about execution. He talked about doors. That kind of language is always revealing. Those who build something talk about structure. Those who depend on position talk about access. At the time, this did not bother me. I was evaluating feasibility, not human behavior. Ethan spoke like someone who had already closed the deal. He referred to investors by first name, mentioned figures, 5, maybe 7 million in the first cycle, and treated timelines as guaranteed. He used "when we start" instead of "if we start." In one of the meetings, he said casually, "Everyone is already comfortable with the structure. Now you just need to formalize it." He did not ask if I agreed. He did not request adjustments. He treated my decision as an administrative formality. I registered it, but I had not yet correctly interpreted what it meant. I moved forward. I opened the structure of the business, explained the financial flow, detailed credit criteria, and made it clear that every release depended exclusively on my signature. I thought transparency would reduce friction and align expectations. The effect was the opposite. With that information, Ethan began positioning himself as the center of the operation. He spoke on my behalf, promised conditions to potential clients, and presented the business to investors as already agreed. I did not yet see that as betrayal. I saw it as excessive initiative. That was when the error began to take shape. The confirmation came from outside, not from him. An investor called me to align the final details and cited terms I had never approved: fixed rate, locked term, and a specific projected annual return. When I asked where that came from, he answered without hesitation. Ethan explained that this was already agreed between you. There was no contract, no signature, no authorization. There was only a version being sold as fact. At that moment, it became clear that Ethan was not waiting for my decision. He was already operating as if it were irrelevant. At the next meeting, he confirmed the pattern without realizing it. He said with excessive naturalness, "I've already made everyone comfortable. Now you just need to formalize it." He did not ask if anything needed to change. He did not open space for revision. He treated my signature as an administrative step. That kind of language does not come from confidence. It comes from dependence. Those who control capital ask questions. Those who depend on intermediation make statements. I did not argue. I did not correct him. I simply registered it. When someone starts speaking like an owner before controlling the asset, they are betting that the other person will not change position. That was when the reading shifted. I stopped evaluating intention and started evaluating incentive. Ethan needed to close quickly to justify the 30%. He needed to show volume to keep investors engaged. He needed me not to review anything after exposure. Everything he did followed that need. There was no anger involved. There was internal coherence. When you understand the incentive, behavior stops being personal and becomes predictable. And one-sided predictability creates asymmetry. At that moment, I decided not to interrupt. Interruption alerts. I continued answering messages, maintained a collaborative tone, and did not correct any promises he made to third parties. I simply said, "Let's keep moving." It was not passivity. It was collection. Every promise expanded the trail. Every name mentioned revealed dependencies. Ethan believed he was consolidating position. I was mapping reach. Only one of us controlled the final point of the operation, the release of capital. And I had not shown that yet. From that point on, I stopped trying to correct anything. Correction interrupts movement. What interested me was reach. I continued attending meetings, confirmed schedules, and responded quickly when it was convenient. When Ethan asked if everything was aligned, I simply said, "We're on track." It was not a lie. The track existed. It just was not the one he imagined. People like Ethan do not need opposition. They need continuity. While they believe the flow is guaranteed, they move too fast and expose everything. He accelerated exactly as expected. He scheduled meetings without informing me, promised specific conditions, and started talking about scale. In one call, he said, "If we close this first cycle, the next ones come automatically." I did not ask for details. I did not correct numbers. I just listened. Every unauthorized promise increased his dependence on my final signature. The more he committed, the less room he had to retreat. That is the risk of selling stability before stability exists. You become dependent on nothing changing. Meanwhile, I adjusted the structure in silence. I reinforced clauses, centralized critical decisions, and made explicit in internal documents that no release could occur without my direct validation. None of this altered the public narrative Ethan was presenting. It altered only the real point of control. Psychologically, this is simple. Those who believe they are in command do not review the board. Ethan remained focused on consolidating image. I was consolidating position. At that stage, the difference between us was already irreversible. Ethan was still playing to appear indispensable. I was already playing to be unavoidable. He talked too much. I spoke the minimum. He promised. I recorded. There was no tension, only misalignment. When someone advances believing the ground is stable, a minimal shift at the right point creates a chain reaction. I did not need to bring him down. I only needed to wait until he depended entirely on something he never controlled. By then, the main change had already happened inside me. I stopped operating to be understood. I started operating to be unpredictable. Not in a chaotic sense, but in a strategic one. I remained available, but irregular. I responded quickly one day and slowly the next. I confirmed meetings without confirming decisions. Psychologically, this creates a vacuum. People who depend on validation hate vacuums. They try to fill them with excessive action. Ethan began talking more, promising more, exposing himself more. Every move told me exactly how much he needed me. There was a clear moment when this shift became visible. Ethan called asking for a simple confirmation. Can I say everything is closed? I did not say yes or no. I replied, we're moving forward. The silence on the other end lasted longer than normal. When he spoke again, his tone had changed. He began explaining too much. He justified timelines, cited investors, tried to reinforce urgency. Those who explain too much are trying to retain control. I corrected nothing. I let him project onto me the anxiety that was his. From that point on, Ethan no longer reacted to what I did, but to what he imagined I might do. Every short response became a hypothesis. Every delay became an implicit threat. That shifts the axis of power. When someone starts overinterpreting, they lose clarity of execution. The mind becomes occupied trying to predict the other person instead of advancing. He still believed he was conducting the process. In practice, he was tangling himself in his own misreading. This is the point Machiavelli describes without ever needing to name it. Those who are completely legible cease to be feared, and those who cease to be feared begin to be used. I did not need to hide critical information. It was enough to remove predictability. To remain present, but unreadable. Ethan stayed overly transparent. He spoke like someone who needed to exist. I was already operating like someone who did not need to be seen. The board began to tilt there, without announcement. The move happened on a Friday afternoon, hours before the final meeting with investors. I sent an updated version of the operational agreement. I did not change rates. I did not adjust timelines. I did not touch the narrative Ethan had been selling for weeks. I changed only one point: exclusivity of intermediation. From that document on, any capital would pass directly through my company. The text was technical, dry, and perfectly legal. I did not warn Ethan beforehand. There was no reason to. The agreement was never his. The reaction came quickly. Ethan called less than 20 minutes later. His voice no longer had the same firmness. He said, I think there's a mistake here. This changes everything. I replied without raising my tone. It doesn't change the operation. It only changes the path. He insisted that this had not been agreed upon. I asked him to read the document again. When someone realizes they have lost control without being able to accuse a formal breach, the discourse changes. He was no longer speaking as an operator. He was speaking as someone trying to preserve position. At that night's meeting, the effect was visible. Ethan spoke little and avoided promises. One investor asked directly, "So now we deal with you?" I answered yes, looking at the table, not at Ethan. He tried to intervene. "I'm still involved." No one responded. Psychologically, this is the most violent moment in the game. When your presence is still tolerated, but your function is already over. There is no confrontation possible there. After that came the predictable collapse. Ethan tried to renegotiate percentage, suggested reducing it to 15, then to 10. He sent long messages, explained intentions, asked for trust. Those who begin to explain have already lost authority. The system was closed, the capital committed, the structure operating without him. He was not betrayed. He was disintermediated. And that is always harder to accept, because there is no injustice to accuse, only a misreading of the game. After that, there was no confrontation, explanation, or formal closure. The business moved forward. The capital entered. The structure worked. Ethan still tried to remain present for some time, sending occasional messages, suggesting contacts, offering strategic support. I responded only when the response was functional. Not out of deliberate coldness, but because his function no longer existed. In real systems, people are not removed, they become irrelevant. And irrelevance does not need to be announced. It installs itself when flow no longer passes through you. Ethan's mistake was not trying to sell me. It was believing I needed to be preserved for him to exist. He confused narrative with control, exposure with commitment. He bet that after involving investors and promising results, I would hesitate to change the arrangement in order not to appear unstable. That bet only works against those who still need to be understood. When someone bets that you will not move, the simple act of moving becomes decisive. It requires no aggression, no brilliance. It requires only not being emotionally tied to your own image. At 38, I would have explained. I would have tried to align, justify, appear reasonable. I would have confused clarity with stability. At 54, I know that explanations are the currency of those who still ask permission to act. Those who control the final point do not need to justify the path. That is the difference between influence and power. Influence depends on continuous adhesion. Power reorganizes space and observes who remains inside it. Ethan sought adhesion. I reorganized the space. Today, when this story is told by third parties, it often gains dramatic contours. Betrayal, coldness, excessive calculation. None of those words matter. What happened was simply a correct reading of position. Ethan moved like someone who needed to climb too fast. I began to move like someone who could wait. In games like this, the winner is not the one who speaks best, nor the one who appears most trustworthy. The winner is the one who understands, early enough, that predictability is a slow form of submission. The world does not punish intentions. It responds to moves, and forgets those who control none of them.
If you stayed until the end, it wasn't curiosity. Stories like this don't hold people who seek comfort. They repel them. I'm not asking for a subscription, a comment, or loyalty. That language belongs to those who still need to be chosen. What exists here is something else, an invisible contract. You listen. You recognize patterns. You leave without announcing anything. If something in this story unsettled you, it wasn't because of Ethan. It's because you've seen this game before, maybe from the other side of the table. Some people learn from advice. Others learn by observing consequences. If you're one of them, you already know what to do.